Welcome to Novara Live. Coming up tonight, as Labour MPs abandon the Prime Minister in droves, will they find a candidate willing to mount a challenge? Could it be Andy Burnham, and can he even return to Westminster in time to be eligible? And later, we'll hear from Paul Holden, author of The Fraud, about Keir Starmer's potentially short-lived time in office. I'm Aaron Bastani, and I have to say, Michael,
I thought you almost forgot my name there.
No.
I'm with, who's this guy? I've worked with him 10 years, but I don't know, it just escapes me.
I am very enthusiastic to be joined by you tonight, Michael Walker. We're going to have a great
I'm
show.
glad to hear it. I'm a bit disappointed because I thought we were going to be a resignation show. I thought maybe the podium was going to come out on Downing Street and we could, but it's still a dramatic day. And his days are presumably numbered.
What a selfless man. I would have thought, Michael, you want to host the show where Starmer goes. 10,000 people watching live. But no, Michael Walker puts his personal ambitions to one side and wants the greater good for Novara Media. And that's where I'm going to mention. We have a fundraiser. If you'd like to support our work here at Novara Media, you can, of course, sign up at novaramedia.com/support. Help us build a new media for different politics. We'll be talking about that more later in tonight's show. You can also listen to the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And finally, don't forget to let us know what you think in the comments below. 87 MPs have now called for Keir Starmer to either resign or set out a timetable for his departure. But the message from number 10 remains ironclad. In the words of Leo DiCaprio in The Wolf of Wall Street, he ain't effing leaving. The Prime Minister hasn't spoken publicly in the past 24 hours. So it was left to cabinet ministers to convey that message after a meeting in Downing Street this morning.
The Prime Minister has my full support. The Labour Party has a process for triggering a leadership election. That has not happened, so we all intend to get on with our jobs, and that's what I'm going to do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
What did the Cabinet say to him, sir?
We've had a very purposeful Cabinet meeting talking about the big issues facing our economy and society. Nothing has been triggered. I'm about to go off to Brussels to continue working with Brussels to deepen the relationship, to benefit Britain. We are working hard on the big issues that are facing the country, and Keir is showing really steadfast leadership. And I respect that.
This government will do what we were elected to do, which is serve the British people. The Prime Minister has my full support in this. And let me just say this. There is a process to challenge the leader. No one has made that challenge.
I mean, that says it all, doesn't it? There are people worried about the cost of living, housing, their kids are in debt, high streets are all over the place, law and order. Many people have many problems. And also, these people can say, Peter Kyle in particular there, I'm going to Brussels. I'm going to Brussels. I'm going to help young people go overseas, go to Europe. Maybe start with getting them jobs here in the UK. If you didn't know, that was Steve Reed, Peter Kyle and Liz Kendall. All three, it's worth mentioning, are very much on the right of the party. They presently support Keir Starmer. If you want proof we aren't a serious country, this is how the BBC covered Kyle's endorsement of Starmer.
I think the most significant thing we've heard is Peter Kyle, the business secretary backing the Prime Minister. He's Wes Streeting's best friend in politics. They went and saw The Devil Wears Prada 2 together at the weekend.
Michael, you're laughing.
Searing! I mean, we did cover it yesterday. I mean, it would be hypocritical of us to sort of have a go at the BBC for mentioning this. But this was Peter Kyle's explanation on the weekend as to why Wes Streeting couldn't possibly be planning a leadership election. That's because someone planning a leadership election wouldn't go to the cinema to see The Devil Wears Prada 2.
Rather convenient, is it? It's a bit like Tom Watson when there was that coup against Corbyn. I don't know. I'm in a field in Glastonbury. How convenient. Cabinet members that didn't speak to the press included Wes Streeting, Ed Miliband, Yvette Cooper and Shabana Mahmood, all big names in the cabinet. Cooper and Mahmood are both understood to have privately urged Starmer to set out a timetable for his departure, with Ed Miliband delivering that same message privately at the end of last week. But it's been left to more junior ministers to publicly call for Starmer to go. At 9:15 a.m. this morning, Miatta Fan-Buller, she's an MP in the south of London, became the first minister to resign from her post. She was the Minister for Devolution, Faith and Communities, and this is how she explained her decision to the BBC.
What was really clear from talking to my constituents was that the Prime Minister had lost their trust and their confidence, and they did not believe that he could deliver the scale and the pace of change that we have a mandate for and that my community deserves. And in the end, that was the thing that drove my decision. It's a hard thing to do, but I think it's the right thing to do.
Next up to resign was Jess Phillips, who stood down as Safeguarding Minister at 1 p.m. She included this critique of Keir Starmer in her resignation letter. Over a year ago, I presented solutions long worked on by brilliant civil servants that would end the ability for children in the UK to take naked images of themselves. 91% of online child sex abuse is self-generated by children groomed, tricked, and exploited into abuse. The technology exists to stop children from being able to take naked images of themselves. We could make this possible on every phone and device in the country. We could stop this abuse. It has taken me a year to get you to agree to even threaten to legislate in this space. Not legislate, just threaten. This is the definition of incremental change. Nothing bold about it. The announcement was meant to be in March. I'm still on a promise this will happen in June. I've given up believing it. How many children were left without a safety net in the time we dilly-dallied and worried about tech bosses? This is just one example. Alex Davis-Jones MP, the Minister for Victims, resigned 45 minutes later, calling for an orderly transition to a new leader. Orderly makes it sound like Gaddafi or something. And Health Minister Zubir Ahmed has also resigned and called for Starmer to go. But the Parliamentary Labour Party is not united on this issue of Starmer needing to leave. And 103 MPs this afternoon signed a letter calling on Starmer to stay in post. Michael, he's clinging on for now. How long do you think he'll last?
Well, we were just talking about this before we went live. The King's speech is tomorrow. So this is like the biggest set piece moment of any parliament. The last one was 2 years ago. And this is, you know, you get all the media there. He has to dress up. He speaks to the Lords. Sort of, he's putting forward the legislative agenda for the party in government. And the whole thing is going to be completely farcical because, you know, there are a lot of people involved. There's a lot of well, there's not drama because it's actually really boring, but there's sort of a lot of people who are dressed up.
A lot of theatre.
There's a lot of theatre. That's the word I was looking for. And obviously it's going to be a farce. And apparently Politico are reporting that the King has said to Starmer he's not really sure he wants to go ahead with this because it all looks so embarrassing and he doesn't want to be used to shore up the legitimacy of the Prime Minister because obviously the King wants to stay neutral. So the whole thing is just incredibly embarrassing. You couldn't have timed this worse. Obviously, what we're seeing with these resignations and what's kind of interesting is obviously you've got the Wes Streeting people. They would quite like an immediate leadership election because then they would sort of deem Wes Streeting to have weaker opponents, be that Andy Burnham or Ed Miliband. Even though the polling suggests that if he stands now, it still would be, not Andy Burnham, Angela Rayner or Ed Miliband. If he were to stand now, he would go up against one of those two, and one of those two would win.
Or even Keir Starmer,
but it's easy, or even Keir Starmer. But it's easier than going up against Andy Burnham. So he's in a rush. The Andy Burnham supporters want to drag this out, but they also don't want to sit on their hands because I think they feel that if they leave it to Wes Streeting's backers to topple Keir Starmer, they will have lost the momentum. So what you're seeing is all of these people who want an Andy Burnham leadership are saying we want there to be an orderly timetable. That sort of makes it sound like it's Gaddafi falling down. We want an orderly timetable. We want this to sort of be set out and happen in the next 3 months because they don't want Starmer toppled in the next 24 hours. They want to basically put a halt to sort of the immediate collapse and push this all back until September so that Andy Burnham has a chance to get back into Parliament.
Fascinating, isn't it? The Burnham faction want to stem the bleeding, just not yet. Just leave him to bleed a little bit more. Proverbially, of course. I'm not talking literally. I would never do that. And Novara Media, our pals in legacy media do like to misrepresent what we say on the show sometimes. If Starmer does cling on, he risks becoming a bit of a national joke. When Liz Truss was on the ropes, the Daily Star memorably held a competition as to what would last longer, a lettuce or her premiership. And the Daily Star have today sent out an intern to buy another iceberg lettuce. They put this video out on their X account, walking around with a lettuce. Michael, has British politics become a joke? You know, it wasn't that long ago we had a Labour MP saying they want, the summer of sex. We have delicious wines in this country now, and now we're having a different prime minister every year. Are we the new Italy?
I mean, I'm all in favour of people enjoying themselves. And what I mean by this is, I think if you're watching politics and you find it all entertaining because of the Schadenfreude, brilliant. I think go for it.
Yeah.
I think people should find joy wherever they can, locate it. At the same time, I do think there is something worrying about Britain. Like, obviously, each of the last prime ministers, you can say that they were deeply flawed people and that's why they fell. But there is a pattern emerging. So Theresa May was in power for 3 years, Boris Johnson 3 years, Liz Truss 7 weeks, Rishi Sunak 1 year 9 months, Keir Starmer currently 1 year 10 months. So, the pattern emerging does make it seem like it is very difficult to govern this country. And obviously there are lots of serious problems that the country has, most of them with very long-term or at least medium-term solutions. And the fact that no one can stay in power for more than 3 years, as I say, that none of these people I particularly sort of on an individual level thought they were great politicians and they deserved loads more time in Downing Street. But clearly something is going wrong with either the people who we are sending into Downing Street, who we are sending into government, or with the constant distractions that they face, which means that sort of there isn't really any policy agenda being implemented, whether or not it's one that we sort of back. And that does mean that there is an element of stasis. Came back from, I'll obviously keep mentioning my trip to China, but I was watching CGTN, so this is their English language state-run news. And it's, some people might find it farcical watching it because it's obviously, people will say our media is also propaganda, but this is much more directly propaganda in that the government do get to decide what's on it. And you watch it and sort of the first 10 minutes is like, China has met its industrial targets and actually surpassed them. And lots more people are reading. And Xi Jinping's just met the leader of Vietnam and they've talked about cooperation. And obviously this doesn't prove that China's successful and everything's brilliant. This is what happens when the state sort of controls what's in the media. But one, you felt less stressed at the end of it because you've been told good news instead of bad news. And also because sort of the media are sort of just telling you sort of this banal stuff, the government can actually focus on stuff. Now, this isn't me arguing for an end to the free press. Like, I feel like if we say we should learn from China and just stop all of this, and whoever is in Downing Street should just get a free ride to do whatever they want, because hopefully then they'll sort of do some long-term planning. Obviously, that would come with some downsides. But I do think that the 24-hour news cycle, sort of Twitter, sort of everyone constantly looking for political advantage has meant that sort of British politics is now incapable of doing anything serious. And it might be like, hopefully, I want Andy Burnham to be the next prime minister. I hope that when he becomes prime minister, he will have sort of the vision that the previous ones have lacked. But I can very easily see him becoming prime minister, this same sort of constant media circus, derailing it, distracting him, distracting everyone around him, and us being in exactly the same situation in 2 years' time. And I wouldn't welcome that.
Michael's big policy proposal, turn the BBC into CGTN.
Well, the main thing is you have to ban everything else.
Yeah.
Right? Because if the BBC becomes CGTN...
What would be our South Morning China
Post? The South Morning China Post, I suppose, the FT?
Yeah.
Although I think there's a different one that's FT. Is that Kaishin?
We'd have to really constrain
we'd be screwed.
Say.
We'd obviously be screwed.
Be a people's commissar. Well, maybe we can have a party political officer just telling us what to do. That's Michael's proposal anyway. Yeah. I do think this is...
long-term in the national interest, of course.
Of course. This is the thing I just want to stick on for a moment. We will be talking about the sort of structural issues in British politics because it's fair to say something has changed beyond the calibre of the people in public office. We've had no prime minister out of the last 5 see out a full parliamentary term. Clearly something has changed. Now, you can talk about economics, you can talk about political crisis of legitimacy, you can talk about the media, and we can do all of that. You can talk about social media, changes in the news cycle. But I wonder...
It might also be bad luck. Maybe it is just bad luck and we've just happened to have had 5 shit prime ministers, but...
Could be. And I actually think it's probably all of that. Yeah. But I'd also ask a question to you as an appendage to the media one. Because there's now this pattern, and it's obviously great for clicks and it's great for attention, and we're in an attention economy, is the British media, and I mean really broadcast media, are they now addicted to this stuff? Like it was very alien to them 20 years ago, right? Partly because of the way the genre worked. But now if you're Sky, your GB News, your BBC, I mean, GB News are basically on this, they've been on the anti-Starmer bandwagon since the day he was, PM. But it does feel like with Boris Johnson, with Liz Truss, with Theresa May, with Jeremy Corbyn, they're just addicted to drama rather than news. And I get it. You're partly an entertainment industry, but only partly. You're also meant to do the news, right?
Yeah, but I mean, everyone is, and this is where I think the problem is, everyone is subject to the same structural constraints, which is if you have a highly competitive media environment, if you are chasing clicks, then we all know what does well. What does well isn't really, actually, maybe he's all right. What does well isn't sort of like, the health secretary has come out with some really interesting proposal to reform the health service so that waiting lists might come down. It is some guy on Twitter has found out some controversy or some drama. Someone hasn't done their taxes properly. Someone said something dumb 20 years ago, and then sort of attention just gravitates towards that because we're all humans. Even on Twitter, our attention probably gravitates towards that. And then everyone is competing for the same clicks. And we all end up just sort of speaking about stuff that doesn't matter, but it's very difficult to escape. So I mean, we can be critical of the banality of the mainstream media, but I do think they find themselves within a structure that it is difficult to get out of, unless you have an authoritarian single party state which clamps down and says none of this stuff. We're talking about industrial targets.
Yes and no.
Again, I will clarify. This isn't an argument for that. I'm just saying, I think there is a structural problem which a hyper-competitive media environment has created that makes it more difficult to govern in the medium and long term than it used to be.
I mean, there's a huge appetite for real news as well, right? Look at the Financial Times, they're doing tremendously well. Look at The Economist, they're doing tremendously well.
None of them are sort of mass media, though. Both of them are sort of niche media where people pay for a subscription. They're not particularly competitive.
We did our video in Birmingham, right? That's going to end up getting a couple of 100,000 YouTube views, which is good. And that's, I think, deep, really important journalism that we did here at Novara Media. If you like that video, go to novaramedia.com/support, help us build a new media for different politics. But people do want that. I'm not suggesting they want it more than the gossip stuff, but they do want it. And I do feel like legacy media underserves that conversation, actually, partly because, they want the clicks and the eyeballs, but Michael, they don't want to leave the M25. They'd rather the drama at Westminster than talk about what it's like to be an unemployed fisherman in Grimsby, or to be on long-term sickness benefit in South Wales when you come from, 4 generations of coal miners. That requires getting off your ass and leaving London. So I'm partly with you, but I do also think journalists are just much more lazy than they used to be, partly because of the economics of the industry. It's not what it was. So maybe we do agree actually a bit more than I'm letting on. Today is a huge day for British politics. No, I'm not referring to these shenanigans at Downing Street or even the aftershocks of last week's extraordinary local elections. I'm talking about another major story which has just landed. And Novara Media has launched its latest fundraising campaign. We're asking for 2,000 new regular supporters to back our work. If you didn't know already, Novara Media only exists because of our supporters. Our mission is to create a new media for different politics. And without their support of £5, £10 or £20 a month, we simply wouldn't exist. We launched that fundraiser with this video.
We're about to take a huge leap, and we need your help.
Corporate media only cares about protecting elites.
They don't call a genocide what it is.
And they only take on vested interests when they're absolutely forced to.
The next decade will be shaped by whoever wins the media war.
That's why we need to get bigger.
Much bigger. We're reaching an audience of millions.
More than 20 million views on YouTube every month.
2.5 million followers on social media.
And we've got 1.2 million subscribers on YouTube.
I'm going to level with you. Just a tiny fraction of that number are paying supporters.
We've achieved so much on a shoestring.
And imagine what we could do if we had twice as many people funding our journalism.
We've got to get bigger and better.
And we need 2,000 people to help us make our most ambitious leap yet.
Much bigger outlets have folded.
But thanks to our regular supporters, we're going from strength to strength.
Small, regular donations are what makes us resilient.
It means our journalism is free for all to access without paywalls, and it keeps us editorially independent.
Build new media for a different politics. Help grow our supporter base by 2,000 people.
Set up a direct debit or use your cards to donate from just £1 per month today.
We can't do this without you.
Michael, exciting, isn't it? Now, you can watch a longer version of that video with some interesting behind-the-scenes conversations footage, including the wonderful Alex, on our YouTube channel. It's getting a lot of views. And like I say, lots of Alex. I actually enjoyed watching it. I learned a fair bit. You can, of course, watch that as soon as you've finished watching tonight's show. It should also be in the description below. The link to that full video, it's about 10 minutes. Alongside that link, of course, is a link to support our work at novara.media/support, or novaramedia.com/support. Michael, it's not the big story of the day. I was kind of joking at the top of this. We've got very big things going on. We may have the PM resign this week.
It's one of the big stories of the day. Don't do ourselves down.
Well, for us, it's a big story. Why should people support our work here at Novara Media?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm so excited about. So the video is sort of about the new studio. I'm so excited to move there. I really want sort of the Novara Media studio to be a place where we can sort of invite more people, have more debates, bring in more sort of people easily of whatever caliber. I know you do it for Downstream all the time, but sort of in Novara Live, I want to get sort of more people in and out, if you see what I mean. Constantly I suppose my priorities shift all the time in terms of what I want to focus on. Now I'm quite excited about the idea that for the first time, I mentioned this on yesterday's show, for the first time I feel like both at local level and potentially even at a national level, there is a policy conversation that is going to go on that we can actually have some relevance in, that we can intervene in. And I say the first time for a while because obviously there was a Tory government who don't really care what we have to say. And then there was Morgan McSweeney and Keir Starmer who, whatever the left said, they would do the opposite. And so there wasn't a conversation that really we could be a part of sort of constructively in terms of what could we do right now to make people's lives better. Now I have a bunch of Green councils. If, for example, Ed Miliband becomes Chancellor, there are lots of people who will be influential, who are within our circles. And I want to be bringing on people on the show to debate what should we actually be doing to make life better in Britain? How do we get growth which is shared fairly? How do we improve qualities of life? What can we learn from elsewhere in the world? And I suppose the more resources we have, the more thoroughly we can do that. Because I suppose, a secret about the news media, and you sort of referenced it a little bit when you were talking about sort of the mainstream media, is there is a sense in which the easiest thing to cover is always the latest gossip
100%.
From SW1. Like that is, obviously on a day like today, we're going to focus on that and we're not going to apologize for that. I mean, the Prime Minister is potentially about to resign in the next 24 hours. We would be crazy to sort of say, oh, we're too serious to talk about that. I mean, this is a big deal. But it is also the case that what's going on in SW1 isn't always the biggest deal of the day. I don't think we do sort of focus too much on that. We talk a lot about international politics. But the more resources you have, the more you can take a step back. You can sort of say, oh, we've got this extra researcher who can focus for the next 4 days on sort of economic policy so that we can do some big segment on that. And I want us to be more ambitious like that, basically. What is the constructive role we can play in the debate about how to make Britain a better country to live in? Yeah. And to do that, we need your support.
Yeah. Michael with the pitch. And it's true, I look at our work on Palestine Action in the last 18 months, the flotilla, Palestine generally since 2023, I think has been superb. Palestine Action, the protests, I think was really exemplary coverage. I look at the coverage in terms of all kinds of issues overseas. I look at our coverage of actually Starmer in opposition. How many outlets were saying, look, there are problems with this guy? I remember publishing an article very early on in his leadership campaign saying, well, there are these people in the shadows. I don't think this chap is who he's claiming to be. And we were very much in the minority in the media. I think story after story, I think we're doing pretty well. Calling out Starmer early doors is something that I'm very proud of on this show. I'm very proud as well, speaking personally, and I'm not doing this to brag, it's because I do it. Everybody here does important work, but it's something I do, so it's something I'm aware of, is just getting out of London. I live on the South Coast, I live in Portsmouth, but I'm in London obviously 3-4 days a week. But going to Merthyr Tydfil, talking to Plaid supporters, Reform supporters, going to Birmingham, talking to the independent candidates and activists. Ahmed Yaqub villainised the media. I don't agree with much of what he says, but when he said that I oppose the Biradari system of patronage, which Labour has cornered, I thought, wow, that's the exact same thing that Reform supporters say. And it's actually finding those extraordinary points of convergence and similarity and understanding, which legacy media is not doing. They're not doing it. And actually, I think there's a really big consensus for many things in this country which we're not allowed to talk about, because the centre, which actually doesn't represent that many people, wants a monopoly on legitimate political conversation. If you agree in expanding that conversation, expanding the kinds of voices included, expanding the kinds of places that are examined, you know what to do. Support our work. Go to novara.media/support, novaramedia.com/support. Also, our coverage of the Birmingham bin strikes last year. Just amazing. I remember a clip of a guy, dad of 5, in Birmingham, dad of 5, member of Unite, telling our person in Birmingham, Polly at the time, I'm $8,000 down because of this pay deal, explaining it all very lucidly without being interrupted. Where else was that happening? Really proud of our work. If you think that's something that's worth pursuing and worth growing, like I say, support our work. The link is in the description below. The issue on many minds during this political crisis is whether this man, Andy Burnham, can get a seat in Westminster in time for any leadership contest to replace Keir Starmer. He was filmed here playing in a charity football match over the weekend, but otherwise he's kept his cards close to his chest. He was also spotted on a train to London this morning. Burnham's backers allegedly include Ed Miliband, Angela Rayner and Louise Haigh. The Manchester Mayor's camp have also suggested to lobby journalists he already has a seat lined up. An ally of Burnham's told The Times this: "We could announce the seat before Wes announces his run, so it looks like he is panicking. Or we wait until afterwards and Wes gets all the flack for moving first. Either way, we're in a strong position." Why did you brief? If you're in such a strong position, why brief it? Anyway, the strongest argument Burnham's backers have for him leading the party is his popularity, something which is certainly rare among modern politicians. Burnham is the only major British politician with an overall positive favourability rating among the public. According to Ipsos, 30% of the public have a positive opinion of the Manchester Mayor, compared to 24% with a negative one, giving him a +6 net rating. In contrast, Starmer is on -40, Rayner is on -31, West Streeting on -22, Ed Miliband on -30. Quite striking, right? Not many people are popular in politics these days. Andy Burnham, a rare exception. Michael, you said you want him to be the next Prime Minister to replace Keir Starmer. Can the King of the North return in time, and can he do what you're saying? Can he fulfill Michael Walker's dream?
I mean, well, the thing is, it would be, Wes Streeting is in a difficult position, right? Because he's probably going to lose anyway. But he's going to have less of a chance of losing if he goes now. But at the same time, if he goes now, it's going to be clear for all to see that he wanted a quick, sped-up leadership election, so he didn't have to face the guy that it seems most Labour MPs want, that clearly the public wants. Like, it's very much in black and white with quite a lot of objective data.
The membership wants.
That the membership wants that Andy Burnham is the best person to lead the Labour Party right now. So, he's got that in his favour. Constitutionally, within the Labour Party, there is a big chance that he won't be able to stand. So at the moment, we've got, I think, around 90 MPs, haven't we, who have said that they want to have a new leader. But to trigger a contest, you need 81 of them, so 20% of the PLP, which is 81 at the moment. You need 81 of them to get behind a single candidate. That would trigger a leadership election. Once a leadership election is triggered, the NEC basically has total power over how long it's going to last, over how long you will have as a Labour MP to get nominations. But I know sources, I think, told The Times that it would be difficult for that to be longer than a month. And so if, for example, Wes Streeting gets the 81 nominations this week, then the NEC sets a timetable where MPs have a month to get the required nominations if they also want to challenge Keir Starmer. Then basically Burnham won't be able to do it. Because he needs to find somewhere to stand in a by-election. And then there has to be the whole by-election, right? Being the candidate isn't enough. He has to win the by-election, which I think he would be able to do in Greater Manchester, but all of that takes time. So there is a clear route to an election without Andy Burnham. Now, if that were the case, I think Rayner and Miliband have both sort of suggested that they would stand against Streeting. They would then potentially win with an eye to, at some point, passing over the baton to Andy Burnham, although the only way they could pass on the baton to Andy Burnham is to have another formal leadership election. And you can imagine how the public might get a little bit tired of all of that.
I mean, it's play for play what the Tories did, right? I mean, not as a caretaker. I mean, Liz Truss was never meant to be a caretaker, but that's effectively what she did become.
And that was a complete disaster for them, right? So everyone was saying that is going to destroy the Tory party for a generation. Perhaps it has. I mean,
maybe forever.
Maybe forever, right? So you can see how the argument that this is all going to be a big, massive mess and could destroy the party for a very long time. It's completely plausible. I think it's also completely plausible that Andy Burnham gets into power and his popularity declines very, very quickly. He just has to make a couple of mistakes and everyone's going to round on him, right? So I think all possible futures are difficult for the Labour Party. I mean, I think it's pretty clear from an objective perspective, if what you want is a successful Labour Party, that Keir Starmer should, at this point in time, suggest an orderly timetable to stand down. Let's have 2 or 3 months. Andy Burnham is allowed to stand, and then you have a leadership election in which he stands and he becomes leader. Like, it's not ideal. It's not ideal to have a prime minister who won a massive majority stand down after less than a year and a half. But given that Keir Starmer has very clearly lost all sort of confidence in his job, the public don't like him, he doesn't seem to really like the job. Like, we need a new leader. Well, the Labour Party needs a new leader.
Oh, you can say we, Michael. The country needs a new leader.
And it should be Andy Burnham. So, I mean, I hope that means he will get it. Also, obviously, the stupidest decision made in the Labour Party in the past 6 months was to block him standing in that by-election. I know the NEC now are apparently sort of briefing that they would be more likely to let him stand this time around. If they blocked him this time around, I think there would just be a complete revolt.
If they blocked him again, the party would deserve to die.
I think it probably would.
I know that's like, it sounds, hyperbole. You literally would. We all make mistakes, but to do the same thing twice when it's quite clear that, like you say, all the polling data indicates the public, the membership,
the MPs as well,
the MPs,
and that does matter.
Not the guy.
Like the MPs and the members and the public are all kind of agreed that it should be Andy Burnham.
Very unusual.
Which is very unusual.
For the Labour Party.
Yeah. There are lots of people saying, oh, it should be the MPs that choose the next leader anyway, not the members, because that's undemocratic. Everyone is agreed it should be Andy Burnham. Now, I don't even think he's perfect, right? But if everyone agrees, make it him. And I think that everyone in the Labour Party is going to be in a difficult position if they block that outcome, which is so clearly the one that most people want. And so, yeah, it's up to Wes Streeting in a way. If he wants to trigger a contest tomorrow, he can. He will be able to get 81 backers. But does he want to be the guy who blocked the leader that everyone actually wants?
So 2 questions. Firstly, can Andy Burnham turn it around? Can Andy Burnham, I think a Labour majority is unlikely at this point, but could Andy Burnham still, lead to a hung parliament where maybe there's a coalition and confidence and supply with maybe the Lib Dems or the Greens or Plaid or whoever, probably not the SNP because they're a legitimate force and Labour have problems with the SNP in Scotland. Fundamentally, they're at odds with one another because of the union and the question about Scotland's membership of the union. But can he turn it around? Can he stop Farage being PM? That's the question that I suppose most Labour members are really focused on right now. And if he can't, can anyone else? If Angela Rayner became the PM, what do you think would happen? So 2 questions there, Michael. My oracle.
I think the sense I get is everyone recognises that Angela Rayner isn't necessarily up to the job. She's not as popular as Andy Burnham in the public. She's not as quick on her feet in an interview, which I think does matter. I don't necessarily think she sort of has the confidence to do that job well. And she might do it better than Keir Starmer, I'm not sure. But, I think she would struggle to take on Nigel Farage. I do think that, the only other person who there is an outside chance that it could work is Ed Miliband, but the risks there are really high because obviously the electorate have already rejected him in a general election. And so if you get rejected in a general election and then get back into Downing Street via the back door, that's a very easy attack.
He's also going to lose his seat,
anyone could make.
Well, Doncaster's a lot more likely to go than, a Greater Manchester seat. Or even Streeting's seat. Doncaster,
that's possible. Although, Streeting's argument that he can make at the moment, which is quite a strong one, is that Redbridge actually had some of the best Labour results in the country, sort of really went against the trend. So, he is now looking safer in his seat than he was a week ago. And he's one of the very few Labour MPs who can say that about himself. So,
the truth is, and this is crazy, if you had to bet on it, if somebody said, gun to your head or, you lose your house or whatever, Angela Rayner, Ed Miliband, Wes Streeting, will they keep their seats? You would say, no, they're all going to lose their seats. They're different parties, as it turns out, but Right now, I mean, things can change, obviously. Again, quickly, because there's a question, a comment rather. Why are you glazing Andy Burnham? We're not glazing Andy Burnham, but quickly, what? Because you said you don't think he's perfect. What are his weaknesses? Because lots of people out there see this guy. He's clearly much more charismatic and telegenic than Starmer. He's got a long history. You know, he's in a cabinet with Blair, etc. So what is his weakness as a politician?
Well, I suppose his weakness is what you can also see as a strength. So that sort of the weakness or the strength, however you look at it, is that he has changed his political skin many times. Now, some people would call that growth. Maybe they say he's a sort of flexible guy. He sort of adapts to the moment. Maybe he comes to different realizations. Also, you know, he did leave Westminster and became mayor of a major British city. And so if he's changed, it's because he's had experience, and that's great. He's not an ideologue. He's a pragmatist. Maybe that's his strength. I think it is very possible that he becomes prime minister and realizes it's a much harder job than being a mayor. And many of the things that people sort of thought were his weaknesses before, why he didn't win those Labour leadership elections before, we will all suddenly realize, oh yeah, that's still the problem with Andy Burnham, which is that he really wants to be liked. He's not necessarily very decisive. It's not clear exactly what he believes in. Like many of the things actually that were said about Keir Starmer, you could plausibly say about Andy Burnham. But I think why it's worth giving him a punt is because he can make an argument, relatively likable, and he does now have the experience of managing a city outside London, which means that he's sort of uniquely placed to try and appeal to, you know, he's not going to win back many Reform voters, but maybe enough to shore up a few seats and to win back some Greens. Ideally, you'd have some kind of openness to a progressive alliance. But I think there are many people who do, at the next general election, will be prioritising keeping out Nigel Farage. And I think they will be, if that's their priority and they're choosing between the Greens and Labour or whatever, I think with Burnham as leader, they're going to be much more comfortable and willing to go back to the Labour Party than they would be under Starmer or Streeting.
I mean, I have to say, when I was in Greater Manchester covering the Gorton and Denton by-election, which is in South bit of Manchester, I met people who said, I voted Brexit, I voted Boris, I'm a Tory, but when it comes to Manchester Mayor, I vote Burnham. I met these people, they do exist. And I think, you know, has to be seen to be believed. He does have a very strong brand in Manchester. And I agree with you. I think he's better than 99% of Labour MPs. I mean, what does that say? I mean, I think the calibre of Labour MPs is terrible, but he's still better than 99% of Labour MPs. I suppose quickly, my view on whether or not Burnham is a good idea or a good prospect, you know, we've learned the hard way, right, on the left. Don't tie yourselves to, well, the centre left certainly has with Starmer, don't tie yourselves to a project which isn't going to work. If the guy hasn't got it or the woman hasn't got it, don't bother, right? Do the policy formulation stuff, but don't go all in on somebody who can't deliver, right? I actually think Burnham's a reasonably good front person, but the point is he'll succeed as a project if he's surrounded by top people, there's policy innovation, it's something different, politically fresh, but it has to be an insurgency within the Labour Party. If it's Andy Burnham becomes the Prime Minister and says, I'm going to be the government of all the talents and I'm going to bring together the right of the party and the left of the party and I'm going to manage the economy just like we have done, I'm going to say a few different things, it's going to be a shit show, basically. There's going to have to be a lot more intellectual curiosity within that project than anything I've seen from the Labour Party in my lifetime, which is why I think it's almost certainly going to fail. The reason why I would support him, I wouldn't vote for him in my seat. I would vote, I think, Green at the next general election in my seat because it's a Lib Dem Labour margin at this point. But the reason why I would back him is because he supports PR. And that's the big one for me. I don't think Britain can go anywhere without electoral reform. And the fact he does and the fact that he might be part of a broader coalition, I think is really important. Let's see a few super chats. We've had a lot tonight. I can only read out one, I think. That's from @AndyThompson 3683 with £5. You have been in the spinal tap drama phase of prime ministers for a while, and it's going to get worse. Can it get worse than Liz Truss? Really? I mean, she was 44 days, was she? 47 days?
Liz Truss, I do have it written down in front of me. 7 weeks.
7 weeks.
7 times 7 is...
Not long. It's less than 50 days. Keir Starmer might not be the Prime Minister for much longer. Over the course of the last 48 hours, many MPs have asked that he step aside. Although even more MPs, for now, have asked the man to stay. But whether he goes this week, after a Labour conference in September, or at Christmas, it doesn't really matter. Because if he is still the Prime Minister by the time of next year's local elections in May 2027, the previously unthinkable could happen. Labour will lose Liverpool. If that happens, then people stop saying whether the party can win double-digit MPs and, in all seriousness, start talking about single digits. And that conclusion of the Labour Party winning single-digit MPs is not me making evidence-free predictions. Polling done by YouGov and published today gives Reform an 11-point lead over the Tories and the Greens, with Labour down 2 points in the aftermath of those local elections. That data was projected by Stats for Lefties into this outcome, with Labour winning 20 seats, which isn't that hard to believe when you think the Greens won the popular vote in places like Newcastle and Birmingham, and Reform, of course, romped home in towns and suburbs. What this all means is that Starmer could be Labour's shortest-serving Prime Minister ever, something which perhaps shouldn't be a surprise, because if he doesn't last until the next general election, he will be the 5th MP to not see out a full term. Extraordinary, but there you go. Something deeper is clearly going on in British politics. But back to Labour and the party's history in government. As of today, Keir Starmer has been in number 10 for 1 year and 310 days. And while he has outlasted Rishi Sunak, Anthony Eden, Alec Douglas-Home, and of course, the lettuce, Liz Truss, he needs to stick around for another year and 9 days to outlast Gordon Brown. He, of course, was in the job for 2 years and 318 days. Of course, in terms of a single ministry, Starmer has already beaten Ramsay MacDonald. He was Labour's first ever PM. He lasted just 287 days in 1929. A little event happened, you might have heard of it, the Great Depression. A bit of a spanner in the works, it's fair to say. MacDonald did, however, come back and last for 6 years, the second time of asking. Gordon Brown and Ramsay MacDonald mark one, not to mention Rishi Sunak. It's hardly august company for a man who won a larger majority than Margaret Thatcher ever achieved less than 2 years ago. I'm going to repeat that. In 2024, Keir Starmer won a bigger majority than Thatcher in 79, 83 or 87. Michael, what the hell happened and how much of that was self-inflicted?
I mean, we've been talking a lot on the show about sort of the structural reasons why it is difficult to govern at the moment. I mean, with Keir Starmer, a hell of a lot of it was self-inflicted. I mean, I suppose the biggest mistake he potentially made was, one, going into government without any plan, but two, going into government without any real allies.
Right.
Because the whole project was just so unpleasant to everyone that there wasn't anyone willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Now, obviously, the thing that everyone seems to remember on the doorstep, sort of when you sort of read what the pollsters are saying or in their focus groups, it's all about the winter fuel payment. Now, the winter fuel payment cut, to my mind, wasn't the most outrageous policy in the world. Like, I'm not necessarily in favor of cutting it, but this whole idea that sort of this was murdering old people. I mean, it was a universal £300 that was instituted sort of 15 years ago for a demographic which is sort of more comfortable than other demographics. Like, probably they should have means tested it sort of to a larger number of people than they did. What I'm saying is that there were some slight problems with the policy, but it became this monumental issue, partly because everyone was just waiting for an issue to attack Keir Starmer on, because everyone had a grudge against him. And the reason everyone had a grudge against him is because he hadn't built up any goodwill, because their whole policy going into that election, sort of into the general election, was this sort of arrogant, we don't need anyone else, we're doing this our way, so F you. And if that's going to be your approach, you better well have an idea and an argument you can make, because you can be a divisive person. Like, Nigel Farage is a divisive person. I hope he doesn't win the next general election, but you know, it hasn't completely crushed his popularity, because he can stand out there and make an aggressive argument. They don't like me because, you know, I believe in this change that we need, yada, yada, yada. Keir Starmer, if you're not the kind of person who is decisive and has ideas, you need people on side, and they did the opposite.
They tried to make their coalition as small as possible. You know, the whole idea of wedge issues is that you get the majority of the public, not the minority of the public. Michael, I'm going to come back to you on this because it's a really interesting story. And of course, you have a lot of interesting things to say. I do, however, have a guess lined up for you. It's worth saying the extent of Starmer's unpopularity has been a matter of public record for some time. As far back as January, this is a crazy one. As far back as January, YouGov had Starmer's net favourability on a par with Liz Truss, which was the equal lowest ever. so we can joke about Liz Truss, but Keir Starmer's there as well. And after winning, like I say, a bigger majority than Thatcher ever achieved. Quite extraordinary. I'm now joined by Paul Holden. Paul is an investigative journalist, friend of the show, and of course, author of The Fraud, which is about Keir Starmer, Labour together, and the crisis of British democracy. Paul, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
If people aren't aware of Paul's fantastic work, they should, of course, buy that book and watch the interview he did with us here at Novara Media on Downstream with Ash. Paul, my first question really is somebody who's really, perhaps you're better acquainted with the Labour Together kind of faction than anyone else in British media. Can Starmer last? And clearly there are lots of powerful people who've been very invested in this project with Morgan McSweeney and Peter Mandelson, etc. It would be naive to think they just disappear. So can Starmer last? And then where do these people go?
Well, I mean, I think Starmer absolutely can't last. I think that's very clear. I think these election results are terminal for him. I mean, realistically speaking, he probably shouldn't have lasted this long anyway. And it's a sense of the effectiveness of this political project to effectively erase anything of competence or value in the Labour Party that was a threat to their particular faction that has kept him in power this long. Because really, in normal circumstances, the crisis around Peter Mandelson was so profound and so severe and so damaging that in normal circumstances, if you had a cabinet of big beasts, of people who could mobilise the constituency, he probably would have been taken down at that point. And it seems very plain speaking to a huge number of MPs that they all pretty much understand very clearly that if Keir Starmer leads the Labour Party into the next election, they'll all lose their jobs. Keir Starmer's personal polling is utterly, utterly dire. The Labour Party's polling is not great, but this is a situation which is actually quite unusual where the leader of the Labour Party and the Prime Minister is more unpopular than his party. And in that sort of situation, the party's going to make a calculation about who steps forward. Now, the problem that they have is that this was a very narrowly constructed political project. You know, it was Morgan McSweeney and a small handful of people who were choosing this new intake of MPs who were not chosen for any particular reason of, charisma or the strength of their ideas, their ability to appeal to the public. In fact, in a vast number of cases, they weren't even really put to the public as they were parachuted in at the last minute ahead of an election they were going to win anyway. And in that sort of situation, those people are more loyal to Morgan McSweeney and more loyal to this project than they are to Keir Starmer personally. This has never really been Keir Starmer's party, even when he was leader. So there is going to be a move on him at some point. The problem is the Labour Party is so denuded of talent and also denuded of bravery that they have to confect this mad situation where they have to bring in somebody from outside of government effectively to try and right the ship. It is just a matter of time. How much damage and how messy it is getting to that point. It's very hard to see how this doesn't become a really ugly bun fight over the next weeks and months.
We had a great comment in our chat a moment ago. Paul Holden must be one of the most vindicated people in history. There you go. Paul Holden must feel so vindicated. The guy wrote a book and then, a year later it all blows up. Important journalism, it turns out. It doesn't come for free. I just wanted to go back to the Labour Together question, though, because some really powerful economic interests were invested in that. Lots of money by British standards went towards the Labour Together project and to Keir Starmer. I mean, these people aren't just going to give up in terms of looking at the Labour Party as a vehicle for what they want, surely? Or is this now a completely busted flush in terms of Labour Together and their role in the Labour Party and the wider ecology of organisations around the Labour Party?
I mean, it's very hard to tell. I mean, Labour Together is an odd organisation and it always has been an odd organisation. I mean, up until 2023, it didn't really exist except as a vehicle for Morgan McSweeney's bizarre secret projects that he ran for many years, and then as the incubator for Keir Starmer's election campaign, but effectively went dormant between 2021 and 2023. And then it only sort of got money back in because they understood that at that point, Liz Truss had been so unpopular that there was guaranteed that there was going to be a Labour victory. So all the people who had backed Morgan McSweeney's campaign and Keir Starmer's campaign, they started pouring money into Labour Together. as a means of sort of rapidly on the fly trying to develop a policy network and a policy proposal that would guide the Labour Party into government. And really their influence and their success was predicated almost exclusively on the idea that Keir Starmer would lead a government of Blairite competence and unity for the next 5 to 10 years, in which these people who are investing money in Labour Together can see a return on their investment. I mean, at this point in time, Labour Together itself as a brand is I think, very significantly tainted by its association with Morgan McSweeney, with Keir Starmer, obviously with the scandal that centred around there going after journalists like myself and reporting us to security services and smearing us with mad allegations. To the extent that Labour Together are actually now looking to totally rebrand, there's a talk about they might even change their name altogether. They're no longer going to be supporting particular MPs. They're going to focus specifically on policy. But if Andy Burnham wins, if Andy Burnham is somehow the manufacturer situation where Andy Burnham comes back into cabinet or back into parliament, then becomes leader. I mean, Labour Together has no avenue to exercise influence over the Labour Party anymore. It dissipates altogether. And at that point, you have to think, well, why would these people carry on backing this particular vehicle? That doesn't mean they won't create new vehicles, there won't be new pressure points, there won't be new ways to try and lobby a new Burnham leadership. But I think this architecture that was set up in anticipation of like a 10-year glorious reign of centrist technocratic managerial competence where they can write policies like digital ID, that's out the water. That's not happening anymore. And these people who want to achieve these things will have to go elsewhere to do so, I think.
So imagine Andy Burnham becomes the leader of the Labour Party and the Prime Minister. He's saying, look, I'm going to hold maybe a general election a year, 18 months, which I think would be a reasonable thing to say. You know, I want to get one parliament through of legislation, then we'll go back to the country. And he says, Paul, he calls you, you know, he leaves a WhatsApp voice note. Paul, I read The Fraud. It's fantastic. These people are awful. What happened to you is terrible. Let's say he doesn't even mean it. You know, he's doing the politician thing. He's trying to build a coalition. And he says, what should I do with these people? Should they be thrown out of the Labour Party? What should I do with them? Should I purge them? What would your recommendation be?
I mean, that's a really interesting question, because really what that question, I think, is the question I've been having with lots of different people. So how do you, is there a path to renew the Labour Party after this project? You know, I think what I try to explain in The Fraud and what I've been trying to alert people to is that this was a project that wasn't sort of temporary. This project sits outside of Labour history in a sense, because it is the most radical, systematic transformation of the Labour Party in its history. And they were briefing this. They were saying, we are changing the DNA of the party. And they were radically effective at doing it. You know, they took over the bureaucracy. They ran it entirely within their control. They handpicked 260 MPs who make up the rump of parliament. They handpicked councillors. They purged the bureaucracy. They got rid of half the membership. This is not the same Labour Party as has existed probably in the last 40 to 50 years, right? And I don't know whether there is a path to a restoration of the Labour Party or a rejuvenation of the Labour Party. It seems to me that the very obvious thing that you need to be doing at this point, you know, if I was to give some policy advice to the Labour Party, is two things. One is you have to have an independent forensic auditor and examination and a committee and maybe even a select committee inquiry into Labour Together, but also into all the historic shenanigans that have happened in the Labour Party, like Ergen House, which I write about in the book. And you need to just absolutely clear house on that basis. And I do honestly think that if you were to do an outside and external forensic audit of Labour Party finances, quite a few people would have to leave the party as a result. And the second thing is you'd have to bring in radical democratic transformation of the Labour Party at grassroots. And for me, the simplest thing that Andy Burnham could do to win over the membership, but also to create a new cadre of potential MPs who could actually appeal to the country, is to say we will no longer, we will have mandatory reselection for MPs. They will have to be voted on by their branches. We're not going to do, stitch-ups or anything like that. We're going to actually listen to the wisdom of our branches. Because I think the thing that's really interesting, if you look at these local elections, is the extent to which, there's all sorts of reasons why this Labour project has failed and why they did so badly in the local election. But one of which is that all the MPs that they've put into these constituencies have almost no substantive long-term history of community organising, of being in the community, of being in the Labour Party even. In some cases, people like Alex Barras-Curtis, who was given a role as the MP in Cardiff West, haven't even won a single internal Labour Party election before they've been made an MP candidate, right? That's a total lack of a local constituency. And what it means is that when the leadership is unpopular, they can't even rely on local MPs to have their own network of local support to go out and rally the troops and say, well, actually, I'm worth defending. The Labour project is worth defending. And the only way you can really do that is to basically say to the membership, you know what, we're going back to the drawing board. We're going to do a grassroots-based Labour Party where we choose MPs from the bottom up. We're going to listen to you. And maybe in that process, first of all, you might encourage some people who've left the Labour Party and gone to the Greens to come back to the Labour Party because they see it as a vehicle for actual change in democracy. And second of all, you're far more likely through that process to get candidates who actually relate to the local community and have charisma and the policy ideas than this mad thing of three people, including Luke Akehurst and Morgan McSweeney, looking at, the collected CVs of a bunch of briefcase people from the third sector and then parachuting him into seats. I think that would be the thing I would suggest to him.
I wanted to ask a question, actually, Paul, because I know you've sort of very forensically documented the extent to which the Labour Together gang sort of moulded the party in their image. We've all seen sort of how brutally they excluded talented left-wing parliamentary candidates like Faiza Shaheen. Of that, there is no doubt. At the same time, I do think that sort of recent events potentially suggest that their revolution wasn't as complete as they might have believed it to be. I'm looking at tweets now, sort of people suggesting maybe Wes Streeting doesn't even have the numbers to get a leadership nomination, and he's definitely not going to win the membership. The centre of gravity in the party seems to be more Ed Miliband than Wes Streeting. And so I wonder if you think that the Labour Together gang might be a bit disappointed, and if actually the Labour Party is still much more soft left than Morgan McSweeney. I mean, you can think about the rebellions on the welfare bill, for example. To me, it doesn't seem like actually the Labour Party is now full of dyed-in-the-wall sort of Liz Kendallites.
No, and I think that's always been the tension of this project, right? It's always been the tension of the Labour Party, in a sense, which is that the membership of the party and its social base is left-wing. It's soft left or it's left wing. And generally speaking, its MP, its PLP segment of the Labour Party has been more right wing than the membership. And that's been a real problem for a long time. And what the Labour Together project is actually, I think it's a very clear-eyed project in the sense that these people who prosecuted it understood at a very deep and fundamental level that they themselves don't have a constituency in the party of any size, that they themselves and their own personalities, but also their factual modus operandi, but also their policy proposals are not popular with the Labour Party membership at all. So this is why they have to engage in skullduggery, in dishonesty, misdirection, stitch-ups, because they understand that if there is a healthy, vibrant democracy, these people stand no chance of being elected as MPs or onto the NEC or have the power that they do. So that tension's always going to be there. I mean, in a sense, there were limits to how they could transform the party because, to transform the party into an image that matches McSweeney's politics, really what you need to do is basically kick out 95% of the membership. And I don't pull that figure out of nowhere because obviously we know that the thing that McSweeney ran before Keir Starmer's campaign was Liz Kendall's campaign, and she got 4.5% of the membership voting for her. That's actually the level of membership support for this sort of politics, right? So this has always been the issue. So when I write about, the Labour Together project and the McSweeney project and the Starmer project, this has really been a project of dishonesty in order to bureaucratically capture a machine, a parliamentary machine, to procure themselves power and all sorts of other things that they're looking to do, but which is fundamentally unstable because it requires an authoritarian approach to its own membership. It requires stitching up democracy. And I think what we've seen, there's this very important document I write about in the book called Redshift, which is a policy document published by Labour Together in 2023. And basically what it does is it sets up the path for the Labour Party to win the next general election. And I'm not going to go into detail, but what they essentially do is they segment the voting population of the UK into 6 segments. And they identify two segments on the left, which is basically people like you, like what they would call the activist left, and then centrist dads. And they say these people are not relevant to this election, we can ignore them. In fact, in certain times, it makes sense for us to actively antagonize them, because that's the way we can prove to the other voting segments that we have their interests at heart. It's what I think is behind the ritualistic humiliation of people like Diane Abbott and Faiza Shaheen. There's a political logic to something like that. And what they sort of arrogantly didn't anticipate is that there is a limit to the amount of abuse people will take in a political party before they go somewhere else. And I think, I was speaking to a CW Fringe event this past week, and I was trying to explain to people that people leaving the Labour Party and joining another political party or deciding to vote for another political party is not an easy or simple thing to do. It often is quite an emotional thing for people to do, because they've had long-term 40, 30, 10, 20 years associations with a political project. But one of the things that's happened as a result of this, because of the instability of it, because of the authoritarianism of it, because they don't actually have a base in the party which they can turn to the membership and say, support us, they've driven people out. They've driven people to other political formations. So there was always an instability at the heart of it. It's an impossibility, really, at a fundamental level, to turn a membership organisation that's left-wing into a membership organisation that looks like Reform with the Tories. You can only do that through bureaucratic control. And this is the contradiction that is now playing out, I think, in that the contradiction is resolving itself by people just leaving it and going somewhere else.
That's really, really useful stuff. Paul, thanks for joining us this evening.
Sure. Thank you so much.
That was Paul Holden, author of The Fraud, Keir Starmer, Labour Together, and the Crisis of British Democracy. I've got a few thoughts about what he was just saying there a moment ago. I mean, one is, and it's easy to forget, the centre of the Labour Party membership is still very left-wing. I know people that voted for Starmer, voted for Burnham, the first time round. They weren't voting for the left candidates, but they're incensed that Palestine Action, for instance, has been prescribed. I know one person who said, I will leave the party if they ban these marches, right? And that's not somebody who is a Jeremy Corbyn supporter even. And it seems to me that, as Paul was kind of saying there, that this very small coterie of people weren't just at odds with the coded left of the party that voted for Corbyn, were in momentum, etc. But actually, I think 95% I think is actually probably quite accurate, at least 90%. Secondly, and I think this is a few sort of points worth mentioning in terms of pragmatism. We hear this term political pragmatism all the time, and of course the left aren't pragmatic, the right are pragmatic. The reason why you want a left in the Labour Party, even if you're on the right of the party, is twofold in my book. Firstly, if you had a left in the party, Mandelson never happens, because you have other people in the tent and they say, look, we don't think this is wise, actually. Here's why, 1, 2, 3. It's not everybody is best pals with the guy and thinks it's a really smart idea. Secondly, in a crisis, you have shock absorbers. You have a very wide range of support and, you don't just sort of collapse, which is what's happening with Starmer. So you want a broad tent, and that's not a left thing or a right thing. You don't want people who disagree with you. Right? I don't think the left should say, we want Labour together on the Labour Party. No, they're spoilers, they're wreckers, get them out. But you do want a broad tent in terms of being able to, at least with first past the post, go to the public and actually be a resilient organisation. Michael, quickly, I've got a few other questions before we wrap up tonight. For me, and again, just to be clear, I'm not a Labour member. I wouldn't vote Labour at the next general election, I don't think, because it's a Lib Dem Labour marginal. I have that luxury. I'd like the Greens to do quite well. But for me, and I don't think Burnham's perfect, there are problems with him. But if he said, I back PR, I back mandatory selection, and I believe in a coalitional politics to stop reactionary politics, to stop the radical right, I would think that's a really good basis on which he could project political authority and actually have quite a popular political programme. What do you think? Again, I said to Paul, you've got Andy Burnham leaves a voice note. Andy Burnham gets in touch with Michael Walker, says, Michael, I know you don't think I'm perfect. 2 or 3 things I can do to make me popular both with the members but also with the public at large.
I think it's very unlikely he's going to go for mandatory reselection. I think something...
If he has to win a leadership election, he might have to do that, right?
Well, he's not going to have to offer that to who would he have to offer that?
If he did, if there was another candidate that went up against him, he might say, well, actually, I need to offer this. Or maybe not mandatory selection, but something else which is democratic within the party.
You could have something like that. I think what's kind of interesting in this moment is, in a way, how flimsy the Labour Together project was. People said this when Corbyn was leader. They're like, he has transformed the Labour Party and it's never going to be the same again. The whole infrastructure of Corbynism crumbled within about 2 months after Keir Starmer was elected leader. And I do think it is very possible that the moment, I mean, it almost happened the moment Morgan McSweeney left Downing Street. The Labour Together infrastructure is collapsing, and the Labour Party is going to become a kind of soft left managerial organisation again, right? Which is what it looks like it's going to become. Now, whether that can win election after election, I've got no idea. I'm always a little bit skeptical of the idea that we need sort of community organisers from these sort of various constituencies. I think we kind of need some people who are very talented policymakers to make some decent policy because this country desperately needs it. I mean,
but why is that at odds with mandatory selection? Look at, for instance, Faiza Shaheen. She would have been the MP for Chingford. She's a very, astute policy person. It wasn't like the members wanted some, muppet instead of her.
Well, I think you can pick some good candidates. I mean, I think it will bring up some good candidates. I think it might bring up some not so good candidates. I mean, I wouldn't have that as a priority right now. I was very much in favour of it when sort of Corbyn was leader because it was impossible to have.
But hold on. This is really important, right? They have primaries in the US.
Yeah.
And the Democrats, out of the primary system, get Mamdani, AOC, a ton of really talented people. And I think you're buying into this binary that is, if you allow the public to decide candidates, you get inferior candidates. I just don't see any evidence for that.
If you want to have it as primaries, yes. If you want to have it as the Labour membership, that's different.
So you support primaries instead of...
I support primaries instead of mandatory selection, I think, basically. But in any case, I mean, I think we do need a lot of very talented, competent people who can implement a reform agenda, which is going to bring sort of growth to the UK. I think Andy Burnham is well placed to do that. I think he's got a lot of very interesting people around him, actually. I mean, Ed Billermel probably will go into number 11 if Andy Burnham becomes Prime Minister. And we will have a very interesting agenda of sort of bringing some things back into public ownership. I hope they sort of continue with planning reform, make it cheaper and easier to build stuff. I would get rid of some of the judicial review when it comes to building state infrastructure. I think you want people to see stuff getting built really, really quickly.
Yeah.
And you want a compelling story which you can tell. I would like to see, Andy Burnham week after week standing in front of a new thing getting built, like some council housing, some new housing that isn't council housing, a big, train station. The moment he gets in, he should announce that HS2 is going to go all the way to Manchester, and it is going to go all the way to Leeds, and it is going to go all the way to Scotland, and that they're going to immediately work out why it costs so much money, get rid of all the judicial reviews that meant it took so long. I think you want him to get in there and very quickly start doing stuff. To be honest, I would also, because he's going to be very constrained financially, so it probably will take a while to see some of these benefits. And there are lots of people who see sort of Israel-Palestine as sort of like a left obsession. There's another way of looking at it, from a very opportunistic, cynical lens, which is that is a really cheap way to show that you are not the same as the previous guy. You literally don't lose any voters in this country by taking a really tough line against Benjamin Netanyahu.
100%.
If Andy Burnham comes in and says, I'm inspired by, meets up with Pedro Sanchez and talks about how he is going to make sure that Britain is finally going to hold Benjamin Netanyahu to account, that immediately wins back so many Green voters, brings back so many people to the party who had abandoned it, doesn't cost him a penny. The bond markets are not going to care. And that will give him the time and... By the way, it's morally the correct thing to do for the Palestinians. But also, if we're talking about the challenge which is going to face the next Labour leader, that might give him the time and space that he can come up with an economic plan that can win sort of the confidence of broad constituencies and finally ultimately improve living standards in the country.
Also, with the Reform voters, there are so many things that you can do which literally cost nothing. Give a speech. I know some people don't like my sort of Twitter posts, my ex posts showing, bombed out buildings from World War II and they were rebuilt and they were awful. He should give a speech saying about how bad post-war planning was. Say it was a disaster. Talk about how great Victorian architecture was. I know it sounds daft, but that's the mood music where actually a Reform voter in, bits of, the Northeast goes, he's right. What they did to Newcastle was awful. Where I am in Portsmouth, the Royal Garrison Church, they never put the roof back on it. English Heritage administers this building. He should be standing outside a building. And you might say, well, no, he needs to build, new schools and hospitals, all of that as well. Just 2 or 3 buildings. So we're going to build it. Nobody's built this since 1945. The Luftwaffe destroyed it in 1941. We're going to rebuild it while I'm Prime Minister. That costs barely a couple of £1 million. And it's just so striking that politicians like Keir Starmer are completely incapable of doing this stuff. And I think it's because, I don't know why, my hunch is that they're just so locked out from the country outside the M25. I say the M25, I really mean SW1, actually, I have to be quite frank. And that's not just politicians, that's their allies in the media as well. Michael, we've almost finished our show tonight. We've got almost 4,000 of you watching. Just to say, again, today we launched our fabulous fundraiser. We're looking to add 2,000 new supporters. We're going to be moving into an extraordinary new studio later this summer. For you, Michael, what does having that bigger studio mean? How will it change our work here at Novara Media?
One, the whole team will be sort of in the same building. So sort of video, articles, everyone will be able to sort of communicate a little bit more. At the moment, we're sort of all dotted around this industrial estate, which improvements could be made there. So I think it will be a more coherent organization, will be more central. I'm just really looking forward to getting more people in the building for debates. I want to talk about, as I said earlier, like the policies that are going to make life in Britain better for people, because I think we're going around in circles in politics and it's actually taking us to quite a dark place. So I kind of want to be part of the solution. And I think that a few more resources, a nicer location, an ability where you can sort of bring in people for a conversation and the chairs aren't falling over, which ours currently are, will really actually make a big difference. Which means, please guys, go to novaramedia.com/support and set up a direct debit. We'll really appreciate it. We should do a thing where sort of if you donate a certain amount, we'll give them an engraving on the side of the studio.
Oh, I quite like that.
I'm not promising that right now, by the way.
Yeah,
but,
Michael is not ahead of fundraising. Yeah. I think Steffi and Alice...
For a reason.
They're doing a cracking job. Yeah, it will not just allow us to expand, twofold. I think this new studio will allow us to expand 4 or 5 times. And ahead of the next general election in 2029, maybe, could be sooner, we will very much be going toe-to-toe with legacy media. I don't say that lightly. We have, 1.2 million subscribers here on YouTube, nearly 1 million people on Instagram. I think across all those channels, plus YouTube, 4 million. We are really helping to make and shape political discourse in this country. We punch far above our weight. I think once we get these 2,000 new supporters, we can do so much more. Really, really exciting. Really exciting. Because we said 15 years ago, when we started this thing, you cannot change politics without changing the media first. You need a different media for a different politics. And Michael, just to say about your point about having these conversations, these debates, you have to disagree. You have to disagree to get to the truth. Knowledge through doubt. And no less than Joseph Stalin in Pravda, before he went crazy, before all the purges.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's the sort of dictum that he lived by, was it?
Well, no, he had a great line, believe it or not. Pravda, until about 1920, the Russian Revolution was quite, intellectually generative and open. But before even the Russian Revolution, Stalin had a line in Pravda, which he edited. He said, the only place that people should disagree is the cemetery. Right?
The only place they shouldn't disagree.
Should disagree. Because people disagree all the time in life, right? When you're dead, of course, you'll disagree because nobody has any opinions. But I think this idea that we shouldn't disagree, I think is silly. And I think it's fabulous that we have all kinds of views here on Novara Media. And Michael and I often disagree. People say, oh my God, they're disagreeing. They must hate each other. I love Michael. He's my fabulous colleague. I learned so much from him.
The more disagreements, the better.
I agree. Well, within reason, right? I mean, if it was just all the time.
If it was relentless yapping.
Yeah. But with that China conversation we had last week, I was saying something, you were saying something, I disagreed. And then I said, it's a good point. You really made me think there. And I value that. And that's what Novara Media is all about. So thanks to Michael for joining me tonight and for joining me here at Novara Media generally. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. And before you go, don't forget to go to novaramedia.com/support. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.